Welcome to the Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters podcast. I'm your host, W.J. Sheehan. Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to our show. My name is W.J. Sheehan, author of the series Bigfoot Terror in the Woods Sightings and Encounters, and we're so glad that you joined us today. All of the books are available as usual in paperback and ebook formats on Amazon.com. And now, volumes 6, 5, 4, and 3 are all out on audiobook via Audible, iTunes, and Amazon, so do take advantage of that. I've narrated them myself in the very same way in which I read accounts on this podcast. So what you hear is what you get. And that being done by the prompting of many of my fans and listeners, for which I am very grateful. And now, let me welcome back my brother, Kevin. How are you, Kev?
Hey, Bill. Doing great. How are you doing today?
Super duper, man. And some of our listeners already know that you were taking a little sabbatical up into the great state of Alaska. And although I've spoken to you a little bit about it, I'd like you to kind of fill us in on some of the details of what you were doing up there.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I hinted at in our one of our last podcasts, I wasn't going on a cruise. So yeah. We were out mostly in the wild of Alaska, out in a place called Chinitna Bay, which is west of the Kenai Peninsula across Captain Cook's Inlet. And it's over this particular little bay is a protected area, a nationally protected area. And what's unique about it, I guess, even in Alaska, is that there are a ton of brown bears there. And, what I learned in Alaska is that a brown bear is basically the same as what we would call a grizzly bear in the rest of North America. But because they have a different diet, mostly fish and vegetation, fish being salmon and vegetation, they actually they end up looking a little bit different because of their diet.
Right.
So they call them brown bears, but for all intents and purposes, it's a grizzly, if you're more familiar with that term. And what's unique about this place is there's very few humans, especially on an overnight basis, very few. And there's a ton of food for the bears. So the bears don't know to be afraid of people, or they don't have a reason to be afraid of humans. And they have plenty to eat. So they're not really interested in eating humans, and they're not familiar with the food sense of humans. So,
you hope.
I especially like the fact that they weren't interested in eating humans, because I was getting super close to these bears. To give you a feel, probably like 15 feet away from a mother and cub.
Oh, man, you're out of your mind, man.
I know. It was a really special getaway and really special setting where you could interact with these bears. And, some of the folks I've told about this, they're like, oh, yeah, well, they put out food to lure the bears in. And absolutely not. This is you're viewing these huge brown bears in their natural setting. And really, seeing them in a special way where they have not been changed even or affected even by the observation of the humans, because the number of humans that see them there is so small.
Wow.
Super cool.
Now, this particular area, did you get brought in there by a bush plane or something?
Yeah, absolutely. So bush plane landing on a gravelly beach. So, Bill, you would have loved it.
Wow.
Not even a seaplane, because in this particular area, the tide swings so dramatically that it's difficult to pull off the landing in a float plane or seaplane. So they actually land on this slanted, gravelly, glacial beach that also turns along with the direction of the water. So It was a little freaky.
And those are one of those bush planes with the big balloony tires on them, right, to set down?
Exactly, the big balloony tires.
What type of plane was it? What type of plane was it, Kev?
It was a big Cessna. So it was a 6-seater Cessna. I forget what the number is, but with the big balloony tires on it, and great pilot took us in there. And fortunately for me, and you, Bill, being around planes our whole lives with our dad being a pilot, the weather was really good because I was saying to some of the other campers that were with us, I said, I hope the weather's nice. And they were like, well, why are you worried about that? And I was thinking, well, sometimes I guess the less you know, the better.
Yeah. Now tell me, I'm always closing the show with always carry more gun than you think you're going to need. Tell me somebody had a weapon.
Yeah. Our guide that was with us, well, first off, you couldn't leave this little camp. And it was small, a little small camp with about 10 tents in it. You couldn't leave this camp without a guide. You couldn't walk outside of this. It had a small electrified fence on it, but I don't think it would really stop a bear. It was like 3 wires between poles.
Wow.
Going around the camp. But you couldn't go past that boundary without a guide. And the guide we were with most of the time, he had a shotgun on his back, a sawed-off shotgun with 5 pump action with 5 shells in it. The first one being just a flashbang, so no lead. And then the next 4 were 1-ounce slugs. And then they had bear spray as well. But it's interesting. This guide, I think he's been working there for 7 years, and he said he's never chambered a round.
Wow, it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, really awesome. But, related to our podcast, Bill, a couple of things. One, I didn't see the hairy man, but I was looking for him.
All right.
And he may be out in that part of Alaska because there is nothing out there. And very few people and plenty of places to hide. I mean, the whole place is a hiding area. So we didn't see the hairy man. We didn't see tracks from the hairy man. We saw a ton of bear, and we saw a ton of bear tracks. We saw wolf tracks as well, interspersed with the bear tracks. I didn't get to see a wolf, but some of the other folks in our group saw a wolf one morning.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool because I guess wolves are even harder to see these days than bear. But you would never in a million years mistake a brown bear or grizzly bear to be the hairy man.
Yeah, that's a comedy show in itself that you must have seen a bear,
No, I mean, these guys stand up on their hind legs like the hairy man. But you are not going to mistake this for, Sasquatch. Like, no way, no how.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way. That whole thing is just a joke.
No, I know that sounds obvious, but I did want to give firsthand feedback that, no way. I don't care if you drank a bottle of Jack Daniels. You're not going to mistake it for the hairy man.
Oh, wait. And listen, the same food sources that these wolves and these brown bears are living off of are undoubtedly the same food sources that a Sasquatch up there is partaking in. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, these brown bears, they eat a lot of this green vegetation that's very protein rich. I think they could probably live on that alone without the salmon. It's called sedge. And we actually ate some of the sedge. So our guide was like, you can eat it, try it, and it was actually pretty good. Of course, I like my greens more than the next person probably, but it was tasty.
What would you compare it to? Are we talking like the consistency of a lettuce or a celery, or is it just like dry and
like a lettuce or a wild parsley, but with more flavor?
Okay,
and not quite the thickness and I don't know, like ruggedness of like a kale.
Okay.
So very, very consumable. If they had it in the supermarket, you would buy it and put it on a salad and you'd be okay with it.
Yeah, and if you were a survivor man, like a Les Straub guy, you'd be out there and you'd know this was an edible food source, and the creatures know it's edible too.
Oh yeah, I mean the bears, you see them, they're just chomping on it all day long. You know, when they're not grabbing a salmon out of the river, they're chewing on this sedge all day long. And again, it's protein rich for them. So good.
Yeah,
stuff.
That's interesting. Now let's segue for a second because I saw what we're going to talk about. But tell the listeners a little bit about that funky little brochure you had about animals you may see or creatures you may see in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, of course, we did this camp, so to speak, that I was talking about, but we were up there for 14 days, so we did a lot of other stuff as well. And on one of the boat tours we were on, they had like a bingo sheet, which is pretty interesting, you know, like basically, you know, see a bear, see a bald eagle, you know, see an orca whale, and one of the 10 bingo items was Sasquatch, which was pretty fun. So, as you know, Bill, I took a picture of that and sent it over to you.
Yeah, no, it was outrageous, you know. And even if it was done like kind of tongue-in-cheek, the fact that this creature is on the minds of who, or the mind of whoever created this check-off bingo sheet is kind of cool, you know, that it's in the head of people. You know, Sasquatch is in people's head up there.
And no doubt about it. And again, there's just not that many people. You know, the whole state is just, you know, we talked about it on our podcast where we went into some of the encounters in Alaska. But I think the stat was that if Manhattan Island in New York City had the same population density of Alaska, I think I said there'd be 27 people on Manhattan Island. I mean, it's so rugged. The other thing I learned when I was up there was I think 1 in 6 residents of Alaska have their pilot's license because basically you need a bush plane to get around.
Yeah, there's no way in or out to many of these homesteading areas.
Exactly.
I mean, we've all seen these shows on television, right, where the person is schlepping all of this stuff with a snowmobile into this remote area and building a little shanty to live in. But, you know, if you're in trouble up there, you're really in trouble.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you couldn't call anybody and have them come and help you. You know, it's who you're with. I mean, you know, Bill, you know, I have some weird allergies, and like I had 3 EpiPens in my pocket at all times where, you know, maybe I should have at least one in my pocket whenever I'm walking around. But in reality, in normal day-to-day life, I don't even have one in my pocket. Up there, I had 3 all the time because I knew there was no one to call. Like nobody can help you except for yourself. You know, the other point too about the encounters and, you know, the absolute impossibility of mistaking a brown bear or grizzly bear for the hairy man, I wanted to mention was the tracks. So, you know, these brown bear footprints, which were all over the place, you know, it looks nothing like a hairy man footprint or a human footprint. Nothing like it, you know.
Right.
That's all I'll say. Like, it's so clearly a bear footprint, no matter what medium it was in. Like, you know, we saw it on sandy beaches, muddy paths into woods, muddy paths into sunlight. You're not going to mistake this for a hairy man footprint.
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, I've seen them myself, and it's just ridiculous. It's a preposterous thing to say, well, you mistook this or you mistook that for a bear. It's always a bear, right? It's always a bear.
Yeah.
The freaking dancing circus bear wandering around in remote Alaska as if, you know, circus bears and circus gorillas have escaped by the thousands across America from train crashes. It's absolutely nuts.
And then, you know, the other point I'll end on, we could certainly kick it around some more, but is the density of the forest. So wherever we were in Alaska, and mostly around the Kenai Peninsula and west of the Kenai Peninsula, oh my goodness, I haven't seen a forest as dense. And then in between all of the trees is typically this plant called Devil's Club, which, you know, as I understand it, Alaska doesn't have any cactus or cacti. this is as close to you get to that, but it's a big leafy plant with these huge spines on the stems, and it makes it nearly impossible to hike around off of a trail, and that contributes in a greater way to the desolation of the forests. You can't just walk into the forest and often push branches out of the way in that, because you have this devil's club plant everywhere, it seemed.
Yeah, and yet the animals do exactly that on a regular basis. I mean, the way God created them, they can deal with these things. We as humans are like, what is this garbage?
Exactly, and why would I want to walk through it?
Yeah, you wouldn't. So they're really isolated in there. It's almost like a shelter or a protected environment for them to be in.
Exactly. But, and then in summary, I loved the place. So,
Awesome.
We were blessed with some fantastic weather, uncharacteristically fantastic weather. Like in 14 days, we didn't see a drop of rain, which is apparently unbelievable for that region of Alaska. And, the fishing and the bear viewing and whale watching and stuff like that was unbelievable, even better than I ever imagined. So I fell in love with the place, and the people are great. So you folks out there that are listening from Alaska, I know some of you have written in. What a great bunch of people.
Fantastic, Kev. Well, so thanks for that great update, and we'll be touching back to that periodically, I'm sure. But now, I know you got something really groovy, man, called the Rougarou. Kev's doing a little spot today in Cryptids in the News and History on the beast known as Rougarou in Louisiana. What do you got today, Kev?
Exactly. All right. From Alaska to the Bayou of the great state of Louisiana. So we're going to talk about the mysterious Rougarou. And, Rougarou, I'll tell you what, Bill, there are so many different versions of this beast out there. And by the way, as many different spellings of Rougarou are out there as well. So
yeah.
But generally, Rougarou, still pronounced the same way. And, the concept of Rougarou is connected to the idea of a werewolf. It goes all the way back to origins with the French over in France during medieval times. So, it carries right up until today, but you can trace it back to medieval times in France. And the name of the creature basically comes, and I apologize to our listeners ahead of time, my French is awful. But it comes from two French words of, I think it's pronounced loup and garou. So, like Rougarou, but, a little bit different in French. And the first word loosely translates to wolf. Okay. And the second word translates into man who transforms to animals. So, basically kind of like a wolf man.
Yeah, just the old Lon Chaney guy when the moon came out and he started ripping the hotel room apart.
Exactly. So, and the legend of Rougarou has spread to many generations, and it's believed that it spread from France to the French settlers that, have concentrated down in Louisiana historically. Pretty cool. So you do have that tie kind of from the Cajun folks, that have their Cajun language in the origins of French, right. that got there from the early French settlers that went down into Louisiana.
Yeah, that whole thing was a French, and they still have the French Quarter.
Exactly.
Down there. And I think their language, a lot of the language spoken down there is a loose-knit version of like French and English or something. It's like their own dialect, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like yours and my interpretation of English.
Yeah, which may or may not be that good. So the Rougarou, I mean, it does seem to lend itself to the Dogman. These Dogman encounters are something that's more similar to the statue of an athletic man with a wolf's head than, say, the description of a Bigfoot, which is usually very broad and wide and more enormous in its dimensions.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, these Rougarous, they're typically described as being 8 to 9 feet tall, so still pretty big.
Yes.
But definitely, like you're saying, the head of a wolf with very sharp teeth, but interestingly, red glowing eyes.
Yeah.
So, we know the hairy man is often described as having red glowing eyes as well.
Yeah, I don't know what that's all about. I just can't put my finger on that. I'm always thinking, first of all, when you start thinking about the Rougarou and the French description of a wolf and a man changing to an animal. I mean, this is a word they created basically out of 2 words.
Yep.
And it's this wolf man who changes from man into wolf, I would assume, right?
Exactly.
So
I mean, it really sounds a lot like, the old Wolfman stories.
Yeah, and to me, this all flips into the demonic realm. There's nothing on this planet naturally created that turns from one thing into the other at will that I know of.
No, and it's interesting. So one theory, one of the many theories around Rougarou is that you have this legend, right, that came over from France and, could be enhanced as well in the Bayou in Louisiana, from this medieval times in France.
Right.
But some of the researchers out there that I came across said, well, maybe these folks are actually seeing Bigfoot, but it's on the background of this legend that's familiar to nearly everyone down there in the Bayou of Rougarou. So, they see this thing that is the hairy man, but they're thinking of it as Rougarou because to them, Rougarou's been around longer than the hairy man. So, that's one theory that's out there.
But look at the heads of the 2 different animals.
I know.
I mean, a wolf doesn't look like a Bigfoot.
I'm with you 100%. Yeah. It's kind of, I don't want to seem like I'm playing both ends of the coin because I just got done saying that you would never mistake a grizzly bear or a brown bear to be the hairy man either. So,
although if you had a rear view of either creature and both were 7, 8, 9 feet tall, broad, some hair on them,
definitely.
What are you going to say?
Right. Well, and by the way, say it's at dusk and you see these glowing red eyes looking at you. I don't know how much of the features I would make out.
Yeah, time to break out the sawed-off pump action. Bang, bang, bang.
And let's just skip that first round. So
we got to.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say we got to chamber the live stuff. Forget about that flash bang.
Exactly. Now, so it's interesting when we look at Rougarou and the research into Rougarou. Like many of the creatures we talk about in Cryptids in the News, some of the origin of the stories were believed to have been created to inspire fear in children. So basically going back, into medieval times, up through, probably even up through, the 1700s, 1800s, you wanted to scare your children and inspire fear in them so that they would stick around the house, stick around the homestead, don't wander out into the forest. So it's kind of like, the old fable of Hansel and Gretel, and things like that, where you tell these kind of horrific stories to scare kids to not venture out on their own when they're not old enough to take care of themselves.
Yeah, Kev, you know what? Before you were born and we lived in the city, there used to be this guy that would wander around the sidewalks. I have no idea who this man was, what he did. He was probably some harmless, helpless soul. And Dad used to refer to him as the boogeyman. And he used to tell us, don't go out by yourself. Don't walk around the streets. The boogeyman will get you, And we were all like, the freaking boogeyman, what's he going to do?
Awesome.
But he wasn't a Rougarou. He was a guy.
That's good. See, I wasn't old enough to remember Dad talking about that, but that's awesome. I love the fact that he was trying to scare the bejesus out of you.
It's incredible.
So more on Rougarou. I think one of the coolest things, and, cool could be interpreted many different ways, about researching Rougarou is the many ways that one may become a Rougarou.
All right, here we go.
So,
I gather you don't eat a bowl of Cheerios and become a Rougarou.
No, and you don't eat some of that sedge up in Alaska and turn into a Rougarou either. So
maybe you gnaw on some Devil's Club and have a bottle of seltzer and you turn into a Rougarou.
So this first version that I pulled out is a bit like the chicken and the egg. So,
okay.
They don't tell how the first Rougarou became a Rougarou, but they say that when the Rougarou draws blood from a human victim, then the current Rougarou is released from the curse and the bitten victim becomes a Rougarou. So it's, I said it's kind of like what I would call Rougarou tag. Like, you're it now.
Yeah. It's a lot like the old Dracula thing, right? When Dracula bit a victim in the neck, they became a vampire or his slave or something like that. I remember that kind of weirdness.
Exactly. And that, by the way, for our listeners, if you haven't, I went back a while ago and read that original Stoker book about Dracula, the old one. That thing is what a creepy book,
Yeah, and his the depiction that was made of the Nosferatu, his monster version of Dracula, was that of like a decaying living corpse. This thing was nothing like, the Dracula that we know with the slick back hair and the neat pressed tuxedo, long tails, and all that jazz. This thing was he was like the living dead.
Exactly.
Wow.
So, but different here than the Dracula story, the original Rougarou, although they remain weakened and kind of sick, or sickly, they're not a Rougarou anymore, but they are forbidden to speak of the experience for fear of being killed by another Rougarou. And, it's kind of like, let's face it, being thought of as being completely crazy, right? If you said, well, I was a Rougarou and then I bit someone else, so I'm not a Rougarou, but beware of these other Rougarous running around, and be like, okay.
Yeah, it's very strange. It gets strange and more strange as we go along.
Yeah, so that's the Rougarou, what I would call the Rougarou tag version. And then, of course, there's the version called Rougarou freeze tag. No, I'm just kidding, of course. Couldn't resist that one.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
So then, if you look back in the 1500s, there's, writings that basically say people believe that the Rougarou was a genetic disorder. So that basically you were born with it, which kind of makes more sense, that you could have some kind of disorder. Maybe it was, who knows, a medical, something that we would know as a rare medical disorder today, but back then they would explain it as, something else, at least a part of the time. So basically you're born with it. Or, interestingly enough, that you might actually get the disorder from being cursed by a witch.
Wow.
So, again, I told you this would be interesting. And in these versions, the person, throughout all of these versions, the person looks and behaves as a normal person in normal society until something triggers the transformation from normal human into Rougarou. And of course, in these stories, the classic trigger is the full moon.
Oh, my God, it has to be the full moon. Oh, man. It was like the Mothman, it all began in a graveyard. It's got to be the full moon.
It's got to be the full moon.
It couldn't be that you go into the burger shack and you leave and the guy put the wrong burger in your bag and you get PO'd. Yeah, you turn into the Rougarou and go back in and tear the joint up.
Personally, that's how I turn into the Rougarou. How did you not get this order right?
Oh, man.
And then, the trigger being the full moon, and this one's similar to the prior one, in order to return to human form, they have to take a bite of human flesh.
Great.
So, and this, I think, is, as I recall, very similar to the traditional werewolf legend. And I think, Bill, I don't know if you remember that movie, probably from the 80s, An American Werewolf in London. That was a classic, where it was two American college kids roaming around the UK, and one of them becomes a werewolf, And,
Yeah.
So kind of the classic werewolf story.
Wow, just incredible.
And then, okay, get ready for this one. So, Bill, if you recall, a few weeks ago, we had a listener send in an email asking if we believed in several different hairy man conspiracy theories out there, right? And one of those, if you recall, had to do with the Catholic Church. So I came across this one, and I had to bring it up because, of course, you and I are Catholics. We had a bit of a howl around the conspiracy theory around Bigfoot and the Catholic Church, as if the Catholic Church doesn't have enough challenges lately. Unfortunately, we don't think it has anything to do with Bigfoot conspiracies.
Yeah, there's nothing going on there.
But wait till you hear this one. So in this variation of the folklore, a wolf-like, man-like beast will hunt down and kill Catholics who do not follow the rules of Lent. So I was laughing out loud like you are when I read this. And then there's a further legend that it says that it's similar, that if you do not follow the rules of Lent for 7 years in a row, then you become a Rougarou. So keep that in mind.
Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic.
So, these are, like I said, promise the strange ways that you can become a Rougarou. And then, just to reiterate, there are some researchers that believe that a lot of these sightings of Rougarou down in Louisiana are, in fact, Sasquatch sightings, or a variation of Sasquatch, that are just heavily influenced in a suggestive way by the many, many, many years of the Rougarou legend. So, I just want to emphasize that again.
Yeah, that's fantastic work. Fantastic work.
Yeah, and then so I'm going to give you one story. Okay, so from Cajun folklore. It's short, but it's good. It gives you a feel for it. So this came from something called a periodical called the Nichols Worth, which apparently is a local college paper down in Cajun country. And it was titled, Rougarou Remains Strong Figure in Cajun Folklore. And it recounts a story from a woman about an experience in her youth. She says, a local boy was being followed by a dog when he decided to cut it with his pocket knife. And the boy saw, now why you would want to cut a dog with a pocket knife is a different story, but The boy saw the dog turn into a man, then ran home to tell his family. According to the woman, the next day, a prominent physician appeared in town with his right arm cut and in a sling. And she says, I remember when the physician shot himself here in Lockport, a place down in Louisiana. A year later, the boy killed himself and left a letter that the family turned over to the sheriff. Even today, the sheriff refuses to let anyone see it. So, this is in the freaky deaky example of cryptids in the news.
There is no doubt about it, Oh, my God. And look, it's all out there for us to talk about, to peruse. A lot of this, as you've said, is folklore and legend. But on top of that, there is something being seen, large and hairy, the glowing eyes moving around in the forest. Now, what people attach it to, as far as what it is a whole nother story in itself.
Exactly.
But that doesn't take away from the sightings of creatures and people saying, oh, it's a Rougarou, or, oh, it's the Honey Island swamp monster, or, oh, it's a Bigfoot, So the labeling occurs after the sighting. And then, of course, there's a lot of folklore and legend involved with these creatures, too.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, you hit the Rougarou on the head.
Yeah. I'd have to jump 3 feet to hit him on the head. Holy smoke. Well, now, before I segue into my account for today, you and I had discussed a little contest where somebody can win an autographed copy of one of the books. So what are you suggesting the contest be, brother?
Yeah, so we can do something like have someone write in to our website, BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com, give us some feedback on the podcast, and over the next 2 weeks after we drop this podcast, we could pick a few names out of the hat and give away some audiobooks.
Okay, that sounds fair enough. And if you're lucky enough, listeners, maybe I'll sign 2 or 3 or 4. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do, but if you don't write into us, if you don't contact us, you don't have a shot at it at all. So we'll leave it at that, Kev. The listeners write in or come on to the BigfootTerrorInTheWoods.com on our contact link. Say hello. Tell us what you think. And, of course, if I get back to you, you'll have to give me your address so I can send you the book. But I promise you, these addresses are going to be deleted after I make up the address label. So
autograph copy. Awesome.
Now, that'll be cool. So, moving right along here. My dear listeners, once again, little did you know when you tuned in this podcast today that you were about to enter a realm beyond all space and time. It is a place which you will never forget. You are about to enter the Bigfoot Zone.
Awesome.
This is by far one of the freakiest Bigfoot accounts that I have ever heard, and I'm about to share it with you, so fasten your seatbelts. This strange and unusual account was told to me by John Murray, a resident of the state of Pennsylvania. Here is what John had to say. My friend Tony and I were rat racing on some fire breaks around a ridge in western Pennsylvania. We had a pair of quads and were tearing it up down this one trail when, as we came around a bend, we saw a Bigfoot crossing the trail ahead of us, some 100 yards or so away. I saw it first and immediately lifted my arm into the air, pointing at it so that Tony would look. Both of us backed off the throttle and slowly made our way up to the point where we had seen it. There was no mistaking what we had just seen. It was a huge, fur-covered monster, and it had crossed the trail, turning its head right towards us as it did so. When we got to where it had crossed, there was somewhat of a trail, but not meant for a quad. So we decided that we were going to take a loop around through another break and see if we could see anything more on the other side. By the time we made this maneuver to get on the other side of this section of forest, about 5 minutes had passed, and we were approaching where we believed this Bigfoot must have been heading. Ahead of us, leaning against a tree, was a man wearing nothing but a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and a pair of white canvas boat shoes with no socks. I need to make something very clear before I continue with what I am about to say. It was early October and late in the day, with the temperature being in the upper 40s and windy. The forest was damp and the trails were somewhat loose and muddied from rain in the morning. The muddy conditions were actually why we were riding that day. As we approached this man, we turned the quads off to BS with him. Immediately, I was taken aback by the strong smell of cheap aftershave or hair tonic. His hair was slick and neatly parted on one side, and his jeans were rolled up in a cuff, exposing his ankles. I had a sweatshirt and a jacket and gloves on, while this dude was wearing a t-shirt and sneakers, standing in the middle of nowhere, smoking. Turning the page here, so bear with me. I know Tony and I were on the same page about this dude. His appearance was like that of a greaser from the 50s. We told him that we had just seen a Bigfoot on the lower trail and that we had raced up here hoping to see it. He said, "I haven't seen anything." As he stood there, I realized that I couldn't smell any smoke from the cigarette, and it didn't seem to be burning down either. Tony asked him if he lived around here, and with this, the guy pointed and said that he lived over in that direction. As Tony continued to talk to him, I took note of the fact that his white sneakers had no dirt or mud on them at all, while our boots and quads were covered in this stuff. These boat sneakers were pure white canvas with no rubber on top. If he had walked anywhere around here, there would have been mud all over the sides at the very least. He wasn't really contributing to the conversation, rather just answering our questions as we asked them. I briefly turned my head towards Tony to kind of give a look that signaled, what kind of weirdo did we just run into? And when I turned my head back, the guy was gone. He had vanished. No more cheap-smelling hair tonic or aftershave. He quite simply was no more. The two of us stood there as if we had both gone mad. Tony started fidgeting with his quad, and I knew why. It was like he and I had to do some type of reality check, feeling the quad's controls and making sure we were still connected to the planet. This event had completely blown our minds. We looked around, but we couldn't see any footprints. So we started up the quads and went back out the way that we had come in, eventually approaching the spot where the Bigfoot had crossed our path and where we had stopped. We were certain of the spot because there was an unmistakable fallen tree by the edge of the trail. As we got off the quads to look around for the tracks, we talked about what had happened with this guy. This particular ground here was very soft, but there were no tracks to be found anywhere. We kept checking and rechecking with each other that this was in fact the spot, and we were certain that it was. We had seen this Bigfoot take maybe 3 steps across this very spot and go into the woods, heading in the direction of where we found this disappearing man. We hadn't stopped to look for tracks earlier since we were following this thing. The Bigfoot was huge, covered in fur, and its arms swung in cadence with its steps as it crossed, and yet there was not a single trace that it had done so. To us, this was absolutely the craziest set of circumstances that we could imagine, but it had happened to the two of us exactly as I described it to you. Thinking about it afterwards, the Bigfoot appeared to be gliding even though it made walking motions. How a 1,000-pound monster can move through the mud without leaving a trace is beyond me. So What do you think, bro?
Boy, I thought the Rougarou stuff was freaky deaky.
This guy...
I didn't know you were going to top me.
Yeah, well, you're talking about... Again, we're left with this bizarre encounter. Believe it or not, what do you say about it? They see what they believe is a Bigfoot. They're in Western PA, rat racing around on their quads on a damp and dank day. They see this thing, and then they encounter this weirdo wearing inappropriate clothing, clean as a whistle, looking like he just got out of the shower and slicked his hair back, smoking a cigarette that doesn't emit smoke and doesn't burn down, and then he vanishes.
Yeah, they run into Arthur Fonzarelli with no leather jacket and white sneakers.
Hey, Fonzie!
What the heck?
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So, look, people, I put this stuff out there for you, for your listening pleasure. But this is a guy who gives this account. And now I've heard of this type of thing where the Bigfoot is seen moving and no tracks are found. I've heard this before. So I don't know what to make of that. It's like a visage. It appears real, and yet it's not. I don't quite know what to make out of that.
Yeah, and part of that could be when they're seeing these creatures, because I think you said it was 100 yards away or something like that when they see it. And then you're in these really rural places, and you're looking at a creature that's out of scale with what you're used to seeing, right? Like if it's 9 or 10 feet tall, it could be that they, can't judge the distance, and they're looking in the wrong place for the tracks. I know that might sound, crazy, but think of how rural these places are when folks see the hairy man. It could just be a question of it's close by where the tracks are, but they're looking in the wrong place.
Well, my mind was drawn when I penned this account. My mind was drawn to the shapeshifter.
Absolutely, yeah.
This thing that is and is not, and then the man, this freaky deaky dude leaning on the tree, completely out of place, virtually non-conversant with them. He wasn't really interacting with them. And then the guy vanishes, and the guy just happened to be leaning on a tree in the direction of where they thought this Bigfoot would emerge, so they rat raced up there.
Yep.
It's very strange, very strange.
That's definitely one of the freakiest accounts that I recall.
So, what do we got today, my brother?
We got some good listener mail. So, first off, we're going to go over to Italy. Well, let me back up. First off, let me continue to thank our listeners for the mail, for the participation. If you see something, say something, like my brother always repeats to you, and I try to as well. Thank you for your mail, and thank you again for your reviews. We love to see all those great reviews, and if you haven't given it a review just on your favorite podcast player, jump in and leave a review for us. But thanks for these emails coming in at our website on the Contact Us section of terrorinthewoods.com. So the first one is from Anthony in Italy.
Hey,
Anthony!
Amazing.
Yeah. And he says, I'm really enjoying the banter between the two of you. And on a sad note, he says, my brother passed away when I was young, and you're fortunate to have each other and to be doing this together.
Awesome.
He says, there have long been tales of such creatures in the north of Italy, and you may want to investigate that further. Thank you for what you do, Anthony. So first off, Anthony, if it's not clear to all of you out there, my brother and I love doing this together. So and because we live so far away from each other, this is a great way to force us, not that we have to be forced, but our lives are a lot like all of yours. Time just flies by, but this is a way to force us to get together and do these podcasts together. So we are blessed to be able to do this with each other. And that tip, Bill, for northern Italy, I know myself, I haven't looked into anything in northern Italy. I'd love to take a field trip. I love the food in Italy.
Yeah, two things. First of all, I'm blown away by the magnitude of people getting in touch with us from all over the globe. It is just incredible.
Absolutely, and you'll see with the letters today, they are from all over the place as usual.
Wow, it's just
awesome,
nuts.
Yeah.
And then here we go again. Here we have Anthony from Italy listening in and tipping us off to potential Bigfoot sightings in northern Italy. I have never heard of such a thing.
Okay, so same for you. I hadn't heard of anything.
Yeah, so Anthony, we're going to look into that. We have a lot of stuff on our plate, but we don't forget anything, and we will certainly do our due diligence to see what we could drum up in the northern part of your country.
Yeah, awesome.
I wish he would have mentioned if he lives in northern Italy, but I guess we don't know that.
Yeah, can't tell from the email.
Okay, good enough. And thanks, Anthony, for chiming in with us and extending us your greeting. We appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so we're going to go from Italy to Wendy in Boulder, Colorado, one of my favorite cities in the western U.S. Beautiful little city. I have the pleasure of going there for business once in a while. Really just a spectacular place. And Wendy says, for those of you that have ears and are willing to listen, there has been much activity by these creatures in my state, so the state of Colorado, and the accounts in your books are further evidence of that. I just bought volume 5 in audio format, and I'm glad you stayed true to form in your reading. It's just perfect. Keep up the great work. I love you guys.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, that is fantastic. And by the way, thank you, Wendy, for puffing me up a little bit there with the reading. Folks, I read these books in audio on Audible the way you hear me read these segments on the podcast. It's not a Shakespearean oration by any means. I'm reading these things like a New York street reporter covering a crime scene. So if you like that, that's what you're going to get on Audible. So awesome. do listen to the Audible sample.
It's awesome. Yeah.
But Colorado, there are a lot of accounts coming out of that area, and she is right. I've had, I don't know off the top of my head, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm not even sure, accounts coming out of there. So there's a lot of activity around that state.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So the next letter comes from Edgar in Russia. So
wow.
All the way to Russia. And he says, I'd like to hear your take on the Dyatlov Pass incident where the hikers were found dead in my country. Yeah. One of the victim's cameras had a photo in it of what most definitely appeared to be a Bigfoot. It or they killed them for sure. Fantastic listening and very unique to the two of you. He says, pure genius with an exclamation point. So thank you, Edgar. I'd say thank you in Russian, but I don't know how to say that. But,
allow me to introduce myself. Wile E. Coyote, genius.
But yeah, I'm actually looking at the Dyatlov Pass incident. I'm not sure how quickly we'll get to it, but for those of you out there that don't know about this incident, going back in time a bit, it's a wildly weird account of a bunch of very experienced hikers basically being found wiped out with various different theories of what might have happened. So stay tuned. But Bill, I know you're familiar with that incident. It's definitely in the freaky deaky category.
Yeah, I do recall that they found look, I may foul this up talking about it, but it's worth just mentioning here in regards to this email we were sent. They found these people in various states of nudity. I think their clothes were off of them. Some of them were completely nude, if I'm not mistaken. I think one was in a tree. They had torn out of their tent I had heard that it looked like the tent was torn open from the inside, and They had run out in fear or out of their minds into the snow and the weather. I think some of them were found with bones broken and rib cages crushed. It was really a horrific, horrific scene.
Yes, and they were very experienced mountain people and hikers, very experienced. Actually, I think, as I recall, they were pursuing like some higher level of certification, as mountain guides or something like that. But we'll get back to that one in the future. It's a fantastic tale.
No doubt about it. Yeah, and I look forward to that. Okay, so where we going?
Cool. All right, and the last one for this week comes from Ted in the great state of Alaska.
Oh!
Yeah, and he says, the podcast is great, and I wouldn't change a thing. Awesome, Ted. Thank you. You guys had mentioned that Kevin was headed up my way. I wondered how things went on the trip. Great show. And if I see something, I will definitely say something. Regards, Ted. So we ended up talking about that one a lot at the beginning of the podcast. But I think we'll end up talking about it more. I loved it. It was my first venture into the great frontier state of Alaska. Certainly not my last. And I mean, what a fantastic place and fantastic people.
Wow, that is awesome. Well, listen, it's a timely thing that our last letter was addressed in the beginning of this podcast. And I'd like to thank the listeners once again for tuning in. And by the way, we are going to include a URL link in the description of the podcast. And if you click on that link, it will take you to Audible, where you will have the opportunity to get a free audio version of one of the books that I've recorded. We're going to randomly post these links based on the books I've already recorded. And of course, I'll be doing my due diligence to finish off the series. So do take advantage of that free audio book. And as we leave today, may I once again remind all of you, always carry more gun than you think you're going to need. Sleep tight.